Welcome to our summary of Shadows Beneath the Broken City. Let's dive into a world that was once a testament to human achievement, but is now a ruin whispering tales of its former glory. The city had once been a living, breathing monument of progress. Its glass towers rose like silver mountains, their peaks touching the clouds. The streets below glowed with lights that blurred the line between night and day, a constant, vibrant hum of energy. People flowed through these urban canyons like rivers of ambition, each individual a drop in a vast, powerful current. But that was before the collapse. Before the day when the very foundations of certainty cracked, and the world beneath the city revealed a terrifying truth. That everything we build, no matter how strong or beautiful, stands only because the earth allows it to stand. Liam Marlowe remembered that day with every breath he took. Not because he wanted to, but because the shadows of that moment clung to him like a second skin, a permanent ghost of what was lost. He had been an ordinary man, a construction supervisor whose life was a series of predictable, comforting routines. He woke early, drank cheap coffee, checked blueprints, and returned home after sunset to the warm, easy laughter of his younger sister, Arya. She lived with him while studying engineering, her bright mind and even brighter future a source of quiet pride for Liam. His life was ordinary, predictable, safe. But safety is an illusion, a fragile veneer we paint over a chaotic world. And illusions have a way of shattering when the world decides to remind us of our own fragility. It all began with a tremor. It was mild at first, so subtle that most people ignored it, writing it off as a passing truck or distant construction. Yet, it was strong enough to silence the birds perched on the telephone wires, a brief, unnatural quiet in the city's symphony. Liam was at the northern construction site, high up on a new skyscraper, reviewing structural load reports. He felt the first tremble vibrate through the steel beams under his feet. The workers around him paused, exchanging uncertain glances, their hands hovering over their tools. But the tremor passed as quickly as it came, and the city collectively exhaled, settling back into its confident, unbothered rhythm. Then came the second one. This time there was no mistaking it. It was stronger, longer, a deep guttural growl from the earth itself. And then the third one broke the world open. The ground roared like a beast awakened from a slumber of centuries. The asphalt streets cracked and split beneath Liam's boots. The towering skyscrapers groaned, their skeletons of steel and concrete straining against an impossible force. A cacophony of alarms screamed across the city. Windows shattered, raining down on the streets like a storm of glass raindrops. The ground itself split open, creating jagged, angry veins that ran across the city, swallowing cars and lampposts. Chaos erupted. Liam, his training kicking in, shouted orders, pulling his workers away from falling equipment, pushing them desperately toward open ground. But before he could reach safety himself, the entire scaffold he was on collapsed. A rain of metal and concrete descended upon him. Dust stole his breath, darkness swallowed his vision, and his world narrowed to the echo of a single, frantic question. "Arya! Where are you?" When he finally regained consciousness, the city had fallen silent. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the hollow, empty silence of something that had lost its pulse. It was the silence of a tomb. Hours passed before Liam managed to claw his way out from the debris. His clothes were torn to shreds, his hands were bleeding, and his lungs burned with every agonizing breath of dust. The city he emerged into was unrecognizable. The proud buildings he had helped build had folded into themselves like crumpled paper structures. The familiar streets were choked with rubble, impassable mountains of concrete and steel. Entire districts had simply vanished beneath landslides of debris. A choking grey haze hung over the ruins, turning the bright afternoon sunlight into a dull, hazy glow. But none of that mattered. The destruction, the pain, the desolation, it was all just background noise. Only one thing mattered: finding Arya. He began moving through the broken world, a ghost in his own city, calling her name into the oppressive silence. He listened for any voice that might answer, any sign of life. But all he heard were the distant wails of sirens, the groaning death rattles of collapsing buildings, and the occasional desperate cry for help from a stranger. He rescued who he could along the way. He pulled trapped survivors from the twisted metal of wrecked cars and guided injured, dazed residents toward makeshift safety zones. But with each passing minute, with every person he helped who wasn't her, the worry gnawed deeper at his soul. Aria's university was near the city center, which, from the looks of it, was one of the hardest hit areas. Liam headed there, a single-minded purpose driving him forward. He pushed through toppled streetlights, climbed over shattered storefronts, and moved through clouds of dust so thick they felt solid. He was a man on a mission, fueled by a desperate hope. Along the way, he encountered a small group of survivors taking refuge under the massive concrete arch of a fallen expressway. Among them was a paramedic named Eva Calder. Her arm was injured and held in a makeshift sling, and her uniform was stained with blood. But her eyes were sharp and surprisingly calm amidst the chaos. She looked at Liam, at the determination etched on his face, and saw not just another victim, but a man with a fire inside him that the disaster couldn't extinguish. Their paths had crossed in the ruins of a fallen world, and in that moment, a new, uncertain journey began. The city was groaning, broken. It felt like the end of the world. Amid the dust and the sirens, he saw her. She moved with a calm urgency, a look he'd only seen on trauma workers. "You're hurt," she said, her voice steady. He glanced down at his shirt, now stained with a growing patch of red. "I'm fine," he replied, the words automatic, meaningless. She just raised an eyebrow. "You're bleeding through your shirt." He shook his head, the pain a distant hum. "It's not important. My sister, Aria, she might be at the university. I have to get there." Her name was Eva. He learned that later. In that moment, all he saw was understanding in her eyes. Her ambulance was crushed somewhere under the same debris that had swallowed the city. Her partner was missing. Without a second thought, she said, "I'll go with you." He didn't argue. He just nodded, a silent pact formed between two strangers bound by a shared nightmare. Together, they moved through the shattered landscape that was once their home. It was a journey marked by moments of desperate hope. They found a woman pinned under a collapsed bus stop, her leg trapped by a steel beam. Liam grabbed a rusted iron bar, using every ounce of his strength as a lever, while Eva carefully pulled her free. A little later, they found a young boy, crying alone beside the ruins of what used to be a grocery store. Eva wrapped him in her own jacket, her movements gentle, and guided him to a small relief group that was just starting to form nearby. Every person they helped was a victory, but each one also added a new weight to their hearts, a stark reminder of just how fragile life had become. When they finally reached the university district, the scene was catastrophic. The engineering building, where Aria had her classes, was gone. It had simply collapsed into an unrecognizable mound of concrete and twisted steel. Liam's breath hitched in his throat. He started calling her name, his voice cracking, his hands already digging through the rubble, ignoring the sharp edges and the searing pain. Eva knelt right beside him, her focus just as intense, her hands searching with the same desperate energy. And then they heard it. A faint sound, almost lost in the chaos, a tapping. Liam froze, every muscle tensing. Eva lifted her head. "Listen, again." He held his breath. There it was. Tap, tap, tap. Hope, fierce and blinding, surged through him. "Aria!" he screamed. They dug with a renewed, frenzied determination, shouting for anyone nearby to help. A small group of survivors gathered, a few students, a professor with a badly broken arm, a volunteer clutching a crowbar. They became a single unit, a team fueled by adrenaline and a desperate need to save a life. They worked together, heaving massive slabs of concrete, clearing mangled metal rods, peeling back each layer of destruction. After what felt like an eternity, 20 agonizing minutes later, they cleared an opening. They'd found a small pocket in the rubble, a tiny space that had somehow held, and inside, covered in dust, bruised but alive, was Aria. "Liam," she whispered, her voice barely audible, tears carving paths through the grime on her cheeks. He pulled her into his arms, his whole body shaking with a relief so profound it felt like pain. He just held her, burying his face in her hair. Eva, watching them, managed a soft, tired smile. She's dehydrated, but she's stable. Arya clung to her brother, her own body trembling. The ground, it just broke apart. I thought... You're safe now, Liam whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I've got you. But safety was a lie. It was a distant, fleeting concept in this new, broken world. Night was falling, bringing a bitter cold and the constant, unnerving threat of aftershocks. The wail of emergency sirens was a constant soundtrack, a reminder of the rescue teams struggling to reach the hardest-hit areas. In the distance, fires burned where gas lines had ruptured, painting the sky an apocalyptic orange. The air was thick with panic, a heavy smoke you could almost taste. Liam, Arya, and Ava joined hundreds of other survivors in a temporary shelter. It was an underground metro station, one of the few structures that had miraculously remained intact. Down in the dim, crowded space, faces were pale under the flickering emergency lights. Volunteers moved through the crowds, distributing blankets, food rations, and precious bottles of water. Doctors and nurses, working with critically limited supplies, tended to the wounded. As the city above them groaned and trembled with another aftershock, people huddled closer, whispering prayers, sharing their fears. Children cried softly in their parents' arms. The elderly sat in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on the concrete floor. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and the sharp, metallic scent of trauma. It was in that crowded underground space that Liam had a chilling realization. The earthquake hadn't just destroyed buildings, it had shattered their illusion of invulnerability. The city he knew, the life he had, was gone. The world was fundamentally different now. But in the middle of all that fear, he saw something else. He saw resilience. He saw a young couple who had lost everything, now comforting total strangers. He saw an exhausted firefighter emerge from the tunnels, carrying 3 small children at once. And he saw Eva, injured and running on empty, still treating every patient with a gentle, reassuring calm. He saw his own sister, Arya, sitting with a terrified little girl who couldn't find her parents, speaking to her in a soft, soothing voice. Eva came and sat beside him, her exhaustion etched onto her face. "People are stronger than they think," she said quietly, her eyes scanning the crowd. He could only nod in agreement. "We have to be." The next 3 days were a blur. The aftershocks continued, each one a fresh wave of terror. The rescue efforts were slow and painstaking, hampered by supply shortages, impassable roads, and the constant danger of unstable buildings. Liam and Eva spent every waking hour with the relief teams. They helped dig for survivors, their hands raw and bleeding. They distributed food and water, guiding dazed and injured people toward makeshift evacuation zones. And Arya, despite Liam's protests, refused to stay behind. She joined them. "I might be young," she'd said, her voice firm, a new strength in her eyes, "but I'm not fragile." They learned the earthquake had been an 8.1 magnitude, one of the most powerful in decades. News reports painted a grim picture. Entire neighborhoods swallowed by massive fissures in the earth, factories crumbled into dust, highways split in two. But those same reports also told another story, a story of unbelievable courage and compassion. A story of people forming human chains to rescue those trapped in collapsed buildings, of neighbors sharing their last supplies, of strangers becoming family. In the face of unimaginable destruction, a new city was being born. Not one of concrete and steel, but one built on the incredible, unbreakable strength of the human spirit. In the aftermath, amidst the silence and the dust, stories began to surface, each one a small miracle against the odds. A firefighter, trapped for 5 long days, survived in a tiny air pocket with nothing but a pocket knife. Can you imagine the sheer will to live, the mental fortitude it must have taken? His story wasn't alone. A toddler, miraculously found alive, had been shielded by her family's fallen bed frame, a cradle of protection in the chaos. And then there was the grandmother, a true testament to the human spirit. She used a simple metal spoon to dig herself out from beneath heavy drywall, a grueling 3-hour struggle for freedom. These weren't just stories, they were beacons. Each one whispered a powerful truth, that the human spirit, when tested, can endure even the darkest shadows. As the week drew to a close, A new sound filled the air, not of crumbling buildings, but of hope. The rhythmic whir of helicopter blades. Rescue helicopters began airlifting survivors out of the city, one by one. Liam, Arya, and Ava, our 3 survivors we've been following, finally boarded one together. They were exhausted, injured, their bodies aching. But they were alive. And in that moment, being alive was everything. As the helicopter ascended, they looked down upon the city they once called home. What they saw was a landscape of heartbreak, shattered, crumbled, scarred, a ghost of its former self. It was a sight that could have broken anyone's spirit completely. Yet as they gazed at the devastation, something else emerged from within the ruins. It was subtle, but it was there. Hope. This wasn't the naive hope that everything would magically return to the way it was before. That world was gone. This was something different. It was a resilient hope, the kind that humans carry deep within their souls, forged in fire and loss. It's the hope that whispers, "We can rebuild, we can rise again." In that shared, unspoken understanding, Liam reached out and took Arya's hand. A simple gesture, but it held the weight of everything they had been through and everything they would face together. Ava leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, watching the ruins shrink below until they were just a memory on the horizon. And for the first time since the world began to shake, Liam allowed himself to take a full, deep breath. He let the air fill his lungs, a conscious act of being present, of being alive. The city had fallen. The physical structures, the streets, the landmarks, they were gone or irreparably broken. But the city is more than just concrete and steel. A city is its people, and its people had not fallen. They had been tested, pushed to their absolute limits, and they had endured. From the shadows beneath the broken city, a new dawn was approaching. They would rise again. They wouldn't be the same people they were before the disaster. How could they be? They would be stronger, tempered by their experience. They would be wiser, carrying the lessons of survival and loss. And most importantly, they would be united, bound by a shared trauma and a collective will, to rebuild not just their homes, but their lives. This wasn't the end of their story. The final chapter had not been written in dust and debris. No, this was the beginning of a new one, a story of resilience, of community, and of the unyielding power of hope. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it. Subscribe for more stories about the strength of the human spirit.